Hello everyone, this is Kenneth Bruni from Tech and welcome back to the channel. So in this video, we are going to look at version control systems, but to be more specific, we are going to look at Git. So Git is an example of a version control system. There are other examples, but I believe knowing Git will set you on the right path. So this is going to be the presentation outline. I'm going to start off with an introduction. Then we are going to look at Git, and finally, we are going to look at Git and GitHub. Then of course, we are going to go and see how some of these things works. So then the elephant in the room is version control system. What is actually a version control system? And over here, I'm saying that Git is a version control system for tracking changes in computer files. It was created by Linus Torvalds in 2005. So this name may sound familiar to some people because this is the same person who developed the Linux kernel. So it is a free and open source, at least for most part of what you will be doing, software that helps software developers manage and track changes to their code base. Now, these are some of the reasons why we would need to use Git, or at least we need to learn Git. It is pretty much an industry standard. So here are some of the main uses of Git. So we would want to use Git for version control. So let's say we have our application and let's say there's a version 1. And we do an upgrade to get a version 2. We don't have to throw the whole code base of version 1 away. Chances are we may need it one way or the other, so we need to keep that version and move on to the next version. And imagine we have about version 20, we can still come back to, let's say, a version 8 or a lower version, depending on what we would want to do. Now we are going to use it for backup for our code base. Then it is also going to help us with collaboration. So you can have about 2 or more people working on the same code base. Imagine you are building a web application in a very large company, or maybe even in a small company. You may be working in teams, and for which reason, maybe there's a particular group working on maybe the UI, the interface of the project. Another group is working on the backend code. Another group is maybe working on the database. Now, these are separate entities that will come together to build that particular product you are working on. So when you work using Git, it helps in your collaboration because you can have a division of labor where you are only concentrating on the UI, another person is concentrating on other things, and when you are done, you can collaborate and build or put your code together. And that brings me to the next point of where we can use, or some of the main uses of Git is branching and merging. So back to the same scenario, we are working on different components or different parts of the project. Now you can branch off, so there can be a branch within the same code base, and we are going to see as we look at this. And when you are done, you can merge things together to form that single unit of a product. Now it also helps with continuous integration and continuous development, and this will tie in into the first point I have over here, where we are looking at your versions and your backups. So if there's a continuous integration of features you need to add into your code, then Git is actually going to help you. So in order to understand Git and use it very well, there are some key terminologies and concepts we need to understand. And the first one I have over here is repository. So repository, a Git repository is a collection of files and folders that are tracked and managed by Git. So the key point over here is we tracking the file systems and also managing it by Git. So a repository is like the code base that is being tracked and managed by Git. And now we have another terminology over here, which is a working directory. So the working directory is a directory on your local machine where you are making changes to the files in the Git repository. So on your local machine, you can make changes, or you can code, or you can write code on somebody else's local machine. That is also his or her working directory. He can make changes or code, and we can put it together in, as you can guess, a remote repository where everybody can have access to it. Now, there's also what we call the staging area. The staging area is where you can prepare your changes to be committed to the Git local repository. Now, you can selectively stage changes that you want to include in the next commit. And we are going to see examples of these when we start working with Git, writing code actually. Now, there's also a terminology over here called commits. So a commit is a snapshot of the changes you have made to the files in the Git repository. Now, each commit has a unique identifier known as the SHA-1 hash, or the SHA is the secured hashing algorithm that allows you to track your changes over time. And we are going to see all these as we move along. Now, to other terminologies, there's what we call a branch. So a branch is a separate line of development that can be created in a Git repository. Branches can be used to work on a new feature or bug fixes without affecting the main code base. So let's say we have our product, we want to add a new feature and we don't want to pull the code down. We still want the code to work. So then we can create a branch, which is definitely going to be isolated from the main code base, work on it, do some integration and testing if it works perfectly before we bring it up into the mainstream for our code. So we can create branches and we can later merge these branches. And that brings to the terminology merge. So merging is a process of combining changes from one branch into another branch. So you get the point. This is typically done when a feature or bug fix is complete and ready to be integrated into the main code base. Now we can have a pull request. A pull request is a request to merge changes from one branch into another. Pull requests are often used in collaborative development environments to review and discuss changes before they are merged. So this is basically a diagram that shows the various stages in the Git workflow. Now this diagram will kind of reveal almost everything to us. So here we have the working directory, we have the staging area, we have the local repository, and we are definitely going to have a remote repository where we are going to, let's say, collaborate. If I am here in Ghana working on a code base, somebody can be in the United States and we can still collaborate, because if there's a remote repository, then we can all put our code there, which is basically a website where we can have access to the same code. So here we have the working directory, and this is basically going to be like our PC where we are typing our code. So our text editor or our IDE, that's basically going to be our working directory. Now after writing some code, we can do a git add onto the staging area. And if you could remember, the staging area is where we actually prepare for our commits. And now we can, from the staging area, we can do a git commit into our local repository, which is going to be a file within our system. Then from our local repository, we can actually do a git push onto a remote repository. So I think the names are quite intuitive. When we do a push, we are actually pushing it from our local repository onto a remote repository. It doesn't mean we are lifting it and we don't keep any record. We are still going to have a record, or we are still going to have traces of our code in here, but then we are going to push the code we have in our local repository onto the remote repository. And then we can also do a git pull. So we are pulling from the remote repository onto our working directory, which we are going to see as we move along. Now, these are some basic git commands we are going to use most of the time. I think about 70 to 80% of the time you are going to work with Git, at least these commands are going to pop up day after day. So the first one we have over here is a git init, and we use this to initialize a local Git repository. Then we can also do a git add, and we pass in a file name, or there are other things we may do over here. And this is to add files to the index or the staging area. So that's where we have over here. After working in our working directory, we can do, if let's say we have a file named app.py and we have written some code in there, when we do git add app.py, then that means we are adding it onto the staging area where it will be tracked. All right, so now let's move on. We can do a git status to check the status of the working branch. We can also do a git commit to, of course, commit the changes onto the local repository, and that's what you see over here. From the staging area where it is being tracked, we can do a git commit into our local repository. And then we can do a git log to check the logs or the history of our git. And then we can do a git push to push the remote repository. We can also do a git pull to pull latest changes from the remote repository. Then we can also do a git clone to clone remote repository. Then finally, or I mean not finally, but then we can always do a git help to get assistance whenever we are lost. So this is a use case which I use for my students, and I believe this is a very practical one, and we can all relate to this one way or the other. So let's say we have this money box, and in Ghana we call this a susu box. So this is where, let's say you have some change, some coins, or maybe some notes. You put it in there, you hide it under your bed, or maybe in a safe space, or maybe this can be a safe. So this is where you put your money, and this is going to be your local bank or your local repository in your house. Good. Now you put money in here, and you cannot just go to a bank and say that you want your money. It is not going to be possible. You have to now take this local repository and push it, or push the content over here into the bank, where maybe you have a bank account and then you have your money in there. So you could see that this is more safe, okay, because somebody can just break into your house and take this, but then the bank has insurance and other things, which even if somebody breaks into the bank, you still have your money one way or the other. But that's going to be a very complex situation. But then once your money is in the bank, it is very safe than it's being here. And then from the bank, you can actually access your money or your funds through an ATM or maybe another bank branch, or maybe if the bank has a mobile application or a website or any other means, you can still have access to your money. So basically, we are going to write our code, okay, onto our local repository. We are going to push it, and anywhere in the world where we have internet access, we can have access to our code. So this is going to be exactly what we are going to do. So on our system, we are going to do an installation of Git. And once we have Git over here, we can be working in our local repository, as you can see over here. Then whenever we are done, we push it onto GitHub. So GitHub is going to be the remote repository. So basically the differences between a Git repository and maybe a GitHub repository is that Git is a local repository and GitHub is a remote repository. Then on our local machine, or maybe on any other device, any other computer device, we can do a Git pull or Git clone to have a copy of whatever we pushed over here. So in order to get through this, we can actually do an installation of Git, and I'll leave this link in the description below so you can actually follow through and do the installation. It's a very simple installation process. Then after which, we are also going to check if the installation was successfully done. So we can do a git dash dash. This is double dash over here, the version, to check in our terminal if the installation was complete. So in this section of the video, I'm going to walk you through how to get Git onto your system. So inside of my browser, I have in here download Git. So you can do a simple Google search of download Git. And here you see the link over here. So that's basically the link I showed in the presentation. So you click on this link, and this is going to bring us up to the official Git website where we can actually download Git onto our system. Now I'm using a Windows machine. So now you can see the various versions over here. I'm using a Windows machine, so you could see that I have download for Windows showing up over here. If you are using Mac OS or any other operating system, you could also see your versions over here. So I'll just click on download for Windows, the link over here. And this will send me to this page where I need to also check out the operating system type that I'm using. Now I'm using a 64-bit operating system, so I'm going to select the standalone installer, and I'm going to select the 64-bit Git for Windows setup. So just about now, the download of the Git executable file has started. It's a very simple process, and the file size is not too much large, so we just have to wait for about a minute and the download will be complete. So now that we have the download complete, let's now work our way through into the installation. So I'm going to go and navigate through my file system. Now I have this showing up over here in my downloads. So this is just like any other application. I'll just double click on the executable file, and the installation wizard is going to pop up, and everything is going to be very simple. Just clicking on some few buttons and we'll be good to go. So we get the setup wizard, and there's a licensing agreement. I'll just click on next. And I think the default setup I have over here is okay. I'll click on next. And here I get this. So it says folder exists. Now I already had this and did an on installation and now doing a new installation. That's why you see this. But chances are if you are doing this for your first time, you are not going to come across this particular prompt. But then I just want to overwrite this. So I'm going to click on the yes button over here. And I get this to select a number of options. And you could see that there are quite a number of options over here. An option for me to do some few things. I think the ones already selected will be okay for me because I have the Git bash and the Git GUI and other things over here. That's okay. And I think the default is good. I believe so. So I'm going to click on next. And here I think the default is okay. I'll click on next. I'll click on next here. And I think pretty much everything over here is next. I don't need the new thing over here. I'll click on next. And then here too, I have a number of options over. You can see that this is the recommended option. It says Git from the command line and also from third-party software. And I think this is better than just using Git from the bash only. So I think this is okay. And actually that's the recommended. So I'll click on next. And I have used bundled OpenSSH. There's a new thing happening over here. I think the default is okay. So I also click on next. Then I also have this. I'll click on next. Then this one to next. Then I think next, then next. So we get to this point. I'll click on next. And then here we have the install button. So I'll click on install and I believe the installation has now begun. It's a very simple installation process actually. So just about now, the installation is complete and you could see that I have my completing the Git setup wizard showing up over here and this is looking good. So over here we have two options. You see that we have these checkboxes over here. I'll uncheck this where view release notes. I don't want to view anything and I can also automatically launch in Git bash, but then I'm going to click on finish and in here I'm just going to go into my command prompt window. So I'm going to go into search and search for CMD where I'm going to use my default Windows command prompt. So I'll click on this and we have quite a number of options over here, but then I'll first show this one and I'll show the others later. So here we have our command prompt. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit in order for this to be visible and I'm going to type in git -- version and when I press enter, I get the version of Git I downloaded and installed on my system. So clearly we could see that the installation was successful actually. So this is looking good. Now there are several ways of working with Git. I can work in here or the other options I have that came with the installation. So I'm going to close this up and show you the other options. So I'll close this and inside of my search menu, I'm just going to type in git bash. So here we have git bash. So I'm going to open this up. And if you have been working with the Linux operating system, the interface over here is going to be, quite familiar. So there's like the Linux flavor. And over here too, I can type in git -- version and press enter. And I get the same prompt showing up over here. So this is the version of Git I installed. So I'll close this and finally I'm going to show you another one, which is a Git CMD, as you see over here. So the Git bash was the Linux version or flavor. Now the Git CMD is like the Windows flavor. So as you can see, this is like the Windows prompt and I'm going to zoom up a little bit. And over here too, if I'm to type git -- version, I get the same thing. So I'm also going to close this. And finally, I'm going to show you the GUI, which is a Git GUI. and that's what you see over here, Git GUI. So there is the graphical user interface where we can actually be clicking buttons and we can work with Git as well. But yeah, so that's it. And I think in the last video I'm going to show you a little bit of this, but then if you are able to work in the command prompt, I think that would be perfect. All right, so this is looking good, and in the next section we're actually going to move on to our VS Code where we actually work with Git. So this is going to be the end of this video. Now, if you find value in the content I'm putting out over here, kindly support my work by subscribing to the ChemBroTech channel. Also, don't forget to hit on the notification button so that anytime I release a video, you'll be duly notified. Share this video with friends and family who find this content very useful. At ChemBroTech, we say learn programming. You can do it. Bye bye, and catch you in the next video.